Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Jhoira Weatherlight Captain. So Jhoira is a 4-mana Izzet commander, and it says whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. So historic spells are artifacts, legendary cards, and sagas. So in this case, it's primarily going to be artifacts, and what that means is that anytime you cast any historic spell or artifact, primarily, you get to draw a card. So every one of those spells replaces itself. And that also means that any artifact that's either 0 mana or is a mana rock that generates as much or more than it costs to cast is a free spell for Jhoira. So to start with, we've of course got our typical card draw spells: Gitaxian Probe, Jessica's Will, Mystic Remora, Aristic Study, Other Side of Bergi as the Horn, some wheels. But then in this deck specifically, we're running a ton of artifacts, so Mystic Forge is going to be useful for that. We're also running lots and lots of spells that are 0 mana or very cheap, so Paradoxical Outcome can be used to bounce all of our cheap mana rocks and then replay them, drawing a ton of cards both with Paradoxical Outcome and all of the artifacts that we're replaying with Jhoira. We also, because we're playing a ton of artifacts, have Riddlesmith. Whenever you cast an artifact, you may draw a card and then discard. So this loots for every artifact that we play, further churning through our deck. And the Reality Chip, which is itself both legendary and an artifact, and allows us to equip and then start casting stuff off the top. So it's kind of another Mystic Forge. Then we've got our combo cards, which again, we'll skip for now. Bunch of counter spells, as you do. 1 extra turn spell in Final Fortune. We could play more, but we don't need to. A little bit of fast mana to get Jhoira out faster. Bunch of lands, very low land count at only 25, because mostly our deck is fairly cheap, and the most expensive thing we're playing is usually just going to be Jhoira or a handful of other cards, but this is a sufficient number of lands. A little bit of protection in Spellskite and Deflecting Swat to make sure Jhoira doesn't bite it. A whole bunch of ramp, which in this deck, because a bunch of our ramp is in the form of artifacts, is even better than normal, since we get to draw cards off of these ramp spells. And then we've got all our various cost reducers in Enthusiastic, Mechanaut, Ethereum Sculptor, and Foundry Inspector, all of which make our artifacts cheaper, which is going to be relevant both for casting various artifacts and for going off with combos. Helm of Awakening 2 as a way to make all spells 1 less, including the opponents. Some removal, which is all mostly just in the form of bounce spells: Chain of Vapor, Machine Over Matter, basically a 1 mana bounce spell, Otawara, Repeal. This doubles up as a way to repeal your own 0 mana artifacts to then draw a card both off repeal and recasting the artifact. Resculpt, exile target artifact or creature, controller makes a 4/4. We do need ways to beat like a Null Rod or a Collector Oof, so we do have to have ways of getting rid of those. 1 Soul Guide Lantern, hits graveyards, also just draws a card and draws a card off of casting it when we have Jhoira. Some sweepers, Cyclonic Rift, and Filter Out, which in this deck, return all non-creature, non-land permanents to the owner's hand, bounces all of our, again, cheap artifacts back to our hand so that we can recast them. Then we've got some tutors, including artifact-related tutors in Fabricate, Transmute Artifact, and Trinket Mage. Then there's a whole bunch of other artifacts that just don't do anything exactly specific, but are ways of just drawing a card on the cheap with Jhoira or just having some other effect. So Aether Spellbomb to bounce stuff, Candy Trail, Scries, and then you can sack it to draw a card. Conjurer's Bauble, mostly just here to cantrip. Same thing with Mishra's Bauble and Urza's Bauble. Pirate Spellbomb can maybe pick off something that is a small creature or just, again, draw a card. Tormod's Crypt for the graveyard. Synthesizer hits another card off the top. And then we've got some other cards that kind of synergize with what we're doing. Artificer's Assistant, whenever you cast a historic spell, scry 1. DRC, Surveil when you cast non-creatures. These are just good ways of digging for what we need. And then Metamorph as just a copy, a clone that we can use to clone various things. So then we've got our various combos. So obviously, old tried and true Underworld Breach, LED, Brain Freeze. Probably don't need to explain how this works. We've got our Displacer Kitten, which can be used to blink around all various things that we have. We're going to be casting a ton of non-creatures, which means we can blink a bunch of artifact rocks and then get their mana back, or just anything else that has an ETB trigger. It also means that because we can blink stuff, any instant speed spell makes Displacer Kitten a pseudo protection spell for Jhoira. So for example, if we have, like, Jhoira's going to bite it to Swords to Plowshares, we can cast anything at instant speed, trigger the Displacer Kitten, blink Jhoira, it doesn't die. And then, of course, we've got our Sensei's Divining Top related combos and Ballista. So if we get infinite mana, we can just Ballista our opponents to death. Retract is going to work similarly to Filter Out, where we can just use it as a cheap way to bounce all of our artifacts back to our hand and then replay them to draw a bunch more cards off of Jhoira. And then Words of Wind, 3 mana enchantment, 1 mana. The next time you would draw a card this turn, each player returns a permanent they control to their owner's hand instead. So you can use this as a way to, instead of drawing, bouncing spells back to your hand. So one, this can just generate infinite mana with certain combinations of cards. So let's say you have Sol Ring and a 0 mana artifact, right? So you cast the 0, so you tap your Sol Ring for 2, you cast your 0 mana artifact, it triggers Jhoira, you pay 1, instead of drawing, you bounce a permanent, which in this case is going to be Sol Ring. So you bounce Sol Ring back to your hand. The 0 mana artifact enters the battlefield. You still have 1 floating. So you cast Sol Ring, and then you use your 0 mana artifact like Mox Opal or whatever to tap to pay for Words of Wind. So you trigger the Jhoira again. You bounce the 0 mana artifact. The Sol Ring enters the battlefield. So this way you generate infinite mana in various combinations. So this can work with Sol Ring, Mana Crypt, etc. And it can be used to just keep looping stuff. This also matters with the various cost reducer cards like Mechanaut, Therium Sculptor, Foundry Inspector, etc. And then Sensei's Divining Top can go infinite with Mystic Forge. So again, if you have any way of getting spells off the top of your deck, so like Mystic Forge, Reality Chip, and then you have a Sensei's Top, if you've got anything that reduces the cost of top, so Mechanaut, Therium Sculptor, Foundry Inspector, Helm of Awakening, or you've got Burgi to generate a red mana every time you cast a spell, it allows you to just cast Sensei's Divining Top over and over and over, drawing cards and drawing your whole deck. So you go activate top, draw a card, put top on top, then you can cast it using Reality Chip or Mystic Forge, and then if you've got any cost reducers, it costs 0, or you generate 1 mana off of Burgi. There's also potentially ways to get even more mana with Words of Wind, so you can go infinite in that way as well. So the primary thing here is going to be get Jhoira down as fast as you can using any combination of ramp and fast mana. Then Jhoira is going to allow you to draw a boatload of cards, since all of our artifacts are drawing us more cards off of Jhoira. And then eventually we'll find one of these combo pieces to assemble and win the game. And it cannot be underestimated how much draw power this deck has. We have an absolute gargantuan amount of cards that are 0 mana or only 1 mana. We have a bunch of cost reducers. We've got a bunch of cards that pick up our artifacts to replay them again. So Outcome, Retract, Filter Out, Riddlesmith, Darcy, and the Bird to filter through cards. We've got just straight up card draw like Wheel of Fortune and Windfall. And then we'll eventually just find a combo and put it together. So a Breach, Brain Freeze combo, or infinite mana with Ballista, top, drawing our whole deck, Words of Wind, bouncing things, etc., etc., etc. And that is Jhoira Weatherlight Captain.